Hello, friends. Welcome to What Magic Is This, a podcast that absolutely oozes the etheric. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and in this podcast, we're going to be talking about magic, the occult, the paranormal, the esoteric, the supernatural, and the weird. So, I've got a bit of a special episode for everybody. You might have noticed that we're not starting with the pre-show quid pro quo. I just want people to know that it's been about a year, just over a year, that the podcast has been on. And as things go, you have to adapt and you have to try new things. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. We're going to be trying something new. Now, usually my guests are not overly familiar with the occult, or if they are, they're usually not the norm that I go to. But in this episode, this one, I thought we'd bring on somebody who has added their own flair to the world of magic. My guest today is an author, talismanic jeweler, and Dirt-Sorcerer by the name of Aidan Wachter. Aidan, how are you?
I am fabulous. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. I've been waiting to have you on the show for a long period of time, and there's a reason for that. Since starting the podcast, I usually get asked a question quite frequently, at least once a week. And somebody says, like, look, you recommend a lot of books, Doug. That's all you do is you talk on a microphone and you recommend books. And it's driving me crazy. Give me one book. And so when they ask this question, I have to respond with a question. I say, look, do you want to think about magic before jumping in and doing the practical stuff? Do you want some metaphysics first? And they say yes to this question. I'll usually recommend Gordon White's Pieces of Eight. The other question I will ask is, do you want to jump right in? Do you want to start doing practical magic immediately? Do you want to get to terms with trance and with sigils and with meditation? And if they say yes to this question, I say, you have one book. And it is a book called 6 Ways, Approaches and Entries for Practical Magic by Aidan Wachter. I have a bit of a story about 6 Ways. It might just be my cranky pants self that I'm not overly big on reading books about beginner's magic. It might just be a thing that I have, but I'm too busy with my Stephen Skinner books and all of that kind of fun stuff. So I believe the book came out in 2018, and I saw that it was being brought up quite a bit on occult forums, and people through podcasts, people were talking about this book 6 Ways. And so I decided one day to have a quick look and see what the contents were. I believe I was just looking, and it's used 3 words. It used animist and spirit-based. And as soon as I saw that, it was like, okay, I have to order this book. It arrived, I cracked the book, and I was blown away. It was one of those things where when you start reading a book and within the first 5 pages you've probably fist pumped the air at least 6 times, then you know that there's something great. So this was a fantastic book. I absolutely love it. And what I love most about it is that spirits are central to your magic, Aidan. Maybe about less than a month ago, Aidan, you eventually reached out after hearing a series of episodes I did on chaos magic. You said you wanted to be on the show, and I said, well, first of all, I got up from the floor because I have this thing. People think that I'm some kind of an expert, but truthfully, I'm still a fanboy at heart. This kind of thing I really get excited about. So when you reached out, I was just like, okay, let's do an episode. So I floated about 3 ideas. I said, okay, Aidan, we can do the same old thing where we start the show and it's all fun, and then you pick a topic, and we just go from there. And the second one was like, hey, Aidan, you can pick any topic in the world. I'll bring you on, and then we'll talk about it. My third proposal was, Aidan, I think what I'd really like to talk to you about would be spirits. And you replied somewhat quickly, yeah, let's talk about spirits. So this episode is going to be still topic-based. We're not getting rid of that, guys. So we're still going with the topic, like my regular episodes. But I think for something as important to magic as spirits are, we need to bring on a professional. So everybody please strap in, lace up, and get comfy, because we're going to be going through spirits with Aidan Wachter. So before we begin, Aidan, we have to start with a little bit of humor. Would you like to hear a ghost joke?
Absolutely.
That's the spirit. And there's the joke. Oh my God. I'm so sorry, everybody. I am so sorry. Terrible. All right, enough of this malarkey. I'm going to toss you a scenario, Aidan. Here we go. You're at some kind of a social gathering. It might be a party, some people. Somehow, word has got out that you may be a magician or a sorcerer, and you will have a curious person approach you, and they'll say, hey, I heard that you're a magician. Can you show me a trick? And then you will say, well, I'm not that kind of a magician, but I do this kind of stuff. And you start to explain what a magician or a sorcerer does. And usually this person will nod along. They'll be like, okay, all right, this is good. And then you will mention a word, and the word is spirit or spirits. And it is like somebody has broken wind or something like that. Because usually they're okay. And then you start to mention spirits, and they just kind of, Normally they'll follow it up by saying, so what, like ghosts or something like that? And you'll say, well, kind of, but spirits. And then inevitably they will ask, so what are spirits? So in this scenario, Aidan, how would you answer them?
Hell if I know. I was thinking about this, and it's a really funny one because it's one of the things I stopped worrying about. What is it now? It is now about 25 years ago, maybe a little more, that I'd hit a point where the reality in my reality of spirits was totally unquestionable.
Okay.
But I'm also pragmatic, and so I understand that the reality of spirits in everybody else's experience is perhaps not that clear, and perhaps I had a different experience going on in general, right? And so I've joked about them as being extra dimensional friends.
Okay.
Hopefully they're friends, but it's kind of a weird one. It's like asking about where I go with it is like this sinks into my kind of biological animism thing, which is I always go to a biological model because we're having a biological experience. So it's one that we can kind of relate to, I think.
For sure.
Which is you go, I found this life form in the ocean. What is it? That's a really tough nut to crack without a lot of work to get there. Well, there's less of them than there used to be, but when we were kids, it was, even worse. And I think that that's true with spirits. I don't know what they are. I don't think that they're all the same kind of thing at all. Mm-hmm. I do think some of them are ghosts and some of them are things that attached to people in different ways when they were alive and now persist kind of in that person's shape. I think I mentioned this in 6 ways that I've had the experience of kind of watching energies build in a particular area. And if they persist for long enough, they become as if sentient. And so you go, well, what's that? Then it didn't really come about like a person necessarily comes about, right? Mm-hmm. It appears to have arisen during an event, right? Mm-hmm. And yet now it remains. So I truly don't know.
I have a bit of a go-to, and this might seem a little bit trite. I actually have had this scenario happen to me, and I just respond with, well, I want you, person who's asking me what spirits are, I want you to tell me what gravity is. And then they'll usually say, well, it's this thing that does this, and if you drop something, it falls to the ground. And I say, I got to stop you. You're describing a phenomena. You're not describing exactly what it is. You're just describing a phenomena. If they're a little bit more intelligent, they'll say, well, it's actually about space-time warping around mass. And I say, again, you're really not describing what gravity is. I know a lot of people would think that gravity is a force, but it is not a force. And in some way, spirits are a lot like this. We're experiencing and able to comprehend some kind of a phenomena. And also what's somewhat similar about gravity is that we like to think that it's this all-encompassing, very powerful force that's just crushing. But of the laws that we have discovered now, gravity is the weakest. It's weaker than the weak nuclear force. It's weaker than electromagnetism. It's very subtle, although we'd like to think that it's not. And the comparison is also good because we can see the effects of gravity, we notice it. And the same thing goes for spirits. But the thing that's great about spirits and the phenomena of spirits is that we don't just see its effects. We can feel it sometimes. We can hear it. All of our senses, except for maybe, I've never tasted a spirit, but that's what spirits are. It's a phenomena to me. The best way of describing what a spirit actually is, and this is the best that I've got so far, is that they are shapes with ambition that do not rely on any one substance but use all kinds of substances all the time. Like gravity, it is immanent and present. It could be that the world that we live in is their world. Perhaps the best way to think about it is that we are the ghosts in this world. We're only here for a temporary period of time. We're the ones that are haunting what we'd like to think of as the spirit world. And usually by this point, this person would stop talking to me, or they'll go, I have to go to the canopy table, and my job is done. So that's the way that I try to describe spirits to people. It's the phenomena that we have, that we can experience. The only difference between gravity and spirits, in my mind, is the fact that we can measure gravity at this point. And that's mainly it. In your books, what I love about them is that they are very personal, and you bring in a lot of personal stories. Aidan, what were your first encounters, if you will, with the spirit world or with spirits?
There were a couple that were very early that I didn't really know what they were. I had some visitors when I was a small child. I think I've mentioned this in a podcast somewhere. One of them was a two-dimensional Indian that was quite menacing, right, like bow and arrow Indian, and was definitely developed from toys that we had, kind of, the little metal figurines. And he was definitely, that was the shape that he took. But he was really present a lot, but didn't really want to engage, but was kind of stalking me frequently as a child. So that was probably the first, but I didn't think of it, of course, that way. I just was scared of him. And then when I was 11, I had gotten into science fiction and fantasy and was reading tons and tons. And so we lived about 30 miles east of Berkeley, California at that time. And I discovered that there was a science fiction and fantasy bookstore in Berkeley called Dark Carnival Books. And so my mom would periodically drop me at Dark Carnival for a couple of hours and then come back and collect me with my vast piles of books. And so that place was like really important to me.
For sure.
And so it was the year that I started doing that. So I know I was 11. This was, retrospectively, I knew it was a dream, that not at the time it was happening, but I was in Dark Carnival, as I often was, and I was sitting on the floor upstairs. It was a little rat maze of a place at that time. And
the best kind of bookstores.
Totally. Stacks of, Ace and Daw science fiction paperbacks.
Nice.
And I felt this cold wave come through the space. And I looked up, and there was a man dressed in my senses at the time said, 1800s, 100% black suit. So
cool.
There was nothing that wasn't black on his suit. And he had a very full but well-kept black beard and long, kind of slicked back black hair and jet black eyes with no pupils. And he was just kind of burning at me, is how I would say it. It was totally terrifying in the moment. And I could feel like that the cold was actually like a wind that was coming out of him and passing through me. This went on for a while, and then I woke up. And it was so intense, even though I'd had a lot of sleep paralysis and a lot of that stuff by that time, that I knew it wasn't a normal dream. And I didn't really know what it was. But after that, in that really coming in the year, around that year and then progressively more, things in my life changed in a really radical way. And so now I can kind of look back at that and see that that's kind of a version of the Man in Black, as the Man in Black at the Crossroads kind of thing, event that happened for me. And that was clearly an initiatory experience, that something reached out and said, you need to wake up.
Right.
And I'm going to wake you up. Because who I was, I believe, is very different than who I was after that event. Yeah. So that was really the first encounter. And again, I was still too young to really think about it in any of these senses. But within a few years, by the time I was 14 and 15, I was reading a little bit on magic, witchcraft mainly, things like my dad's Castaneda books and stuff like that.
Oh, classic.
And great shit, really, for whatever. If you don't, it's not anthropology, but it's what it is, and it's good stuff.
Absolutely.
Then, eventually, by the time I was 18, I guess 18 is the first super fully conscious experience I had. And I talk about this in Weaving Fate a little bit in the new book, that my girlfriend and I were van lifing it in her VW bus with her dog up in Mount Shasta. Right. And I decided one day, we were camped at a place called Castle Lake. And above Castle Lake, there is this rock formation that is called Castle Crags up above it. And I decided I was going up there. At this point, I'd known some witches and some magicians and had done a little bit of work, but not anything serious. And it had worked. You know, I was doing stuff that worked, but it was very haphazard and occasional. But I decided I was going to go eat lunch up on the crags. And so I started straight up the wall. I didn't try and figure out how you get there the logical way. And so I'm like pulling myself up through all this sagebrush and tearing my clothes up and myself. And I'm just like, no, I'm going up here. So it's whatever. I'll get tore up. It's okay. Yeah. I'm 18. I don't care.
Invincible.
Exactly. I'm going up there. Things start getting peculiar as I'm going up. And at one point, things are incredibly impenetrable. And I remember I sat back or kind of hung back because I'm really climbing up this rock and I'm in the sagebrush. There's nowhere to like relax. I said, you know, if you don't want me up here, that's kind of too bad because I'm coming up here. And so it would be helpful if you would instead guide me to a better pathway up because this one is clearly not good.
Right.
And I remember having this, I don't know if I think I said it out loud. I don't remember because things got so crazy afterwards. I pulled myself through the next batch of sagebrush and I was on a deer path. Mm-hmm. I was like, thank you. And I remember I could hear crows. There were crows everywhere. I followed the path up the hill and I stopped at some point and had lunch. I was carrying a little bag with I probably had some sage and my cigarettes and things like that. And so I think I burned some sage and had a cigarette and ate a little bit of food. And then I followed this deer path and it led me up to what must have been the north-facing side of the ridge that I was on. I crested the top of that ridge, and where I was, it was very sunny, but it was at the end it was the spring where there was still snow around some, but right. So the snow part of this is not actually the part that's relevant, but I crested this ridge coming out of very hot sun exposed rock to a snowfield that dropped down the other side of the ridge. And I could see down the ridge, maybe half a mile, kind of headed down into the valley, this little, like straight up European Black Forest fairy tale cottage with smoke coming out of the chimney. It was like it grabbed me by my heart in my chest and started pulling me down to it. It was unquestionably fairyland. Yeah. Like my mind went there immediately. Like I have found the door to fairyland. I took about 10 steps and a perfectly clear voice said that I heard as if it was out loud, if you go, you can't come back. And I stopped. I think I stood there for an hour and I won't say I was thinking as I wasn't processing in a logical fashion, but I was processing like the whole experience that was going on, this thing I was seeing, the kind of presence that I could feel that was waiting for my response, right. For me to make a choice, all of that. And I decided I wasn't going to do that. So I said, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm not going to do that. And I continued on my way and I eventually worked my way back to our camp. So that was phase one of a series of events. Who I knew up there and why we were up there is a friend of mine that I've known since I was 17, who is the first witch I met. Okay. And her mother was the first kind of overt power person I ever met from a magical perspective.
What do you mean?
Very, very intense.
Power. Okay.
Like if you think about the Castaneda stories and they talk about the man of power and that you can kind of feel this wave off of them. Her mother was that person.
Got it. All right.
She was the first one I went like, oh, that's what that looks like. Yeah. Right. And I knew that when I met her. And so I had come back to our van and I told my girlfriend what had happened. And I'm sure she thought I was crazy, but she took it well. I don't know whether it was later that day or the next morning. Yeah, it was the next morning.
How did you sleep?
I think I slept well.
Okay.
But the next morning, this woman's mother showed up to check up on us. Mm-hmm. She showed up and said, you know, you and I, let's take a walk. And so started taking a walk, and she started showing me a few plants that were of interest to her and telling me kind of what you could use them for, though that was not my thing at the time. It was a little early for me. She said, so up there, and points to the crags where I was. She goes, that's a very strange place. And I said, I'm aware of that.
I got it.
And she said, most people can't get up there. She goes, it'll stop most people from getting up there. And I said, well, how does it stop people? Because it was kind of rough getting up there. She goes, usually the crows will drive them off. And I said, oh, I heard the crows. And she goes, did you see the crows? I said, no, I never saw the crows. It was a really interesting moment for me. And then she basically said some things that I couldn't interpret until about 5 years ago, which one of the things that she said is, she said, you could get up there because you're not like the people who try to get up there. And essentially what she said, it's one of those things that I hesitate to even say because it can be interpreted so wrong. And so I want to be really clear about me not accepting this interpretation at that time.
Right.
How she said it was, she basically said, like, you white people, because she was Native American,
right,
can't, or the white people can't get up there. And I'm like, well, I'm a white person. And she said, you're not really normal. That wasn't her exact language, but she basically said, it's like, you shouldn't think about yourself that way, or something like that. And so I think what she was doing is she felt the whole thing go down and went to kind of come make sure I was okay, and then to reinforce the experience, like, you're peculiar, and so you had a peculiar experience, right? So that was part 2. And then part 3 happened a couple days later. I was fucking around at Castle Lake, basically log rolling on some logs that were in the water. And of course I fell in. And of course it was all snowmelt. So it was very, very cold.
Yeah.
And so I kind of became hypothermic. And so my girlfriend kept me moving and got me back to the van, got me out of my clothes, we closed up the van because, solar gain in the VW bus is pretty good. And she wrapped me up in some blankets. And then it got weird in that I had the first experience that I've had a lot since, where my experience of my consciousness moved from being in the front of my face, is how I'm going to describe it, to moving way into the back, and something else moved into the front. And I could see basically through that being's eyes and feel what they were feeling. And they talked to my girlfriend a bit in French and a bit in some other language. And they were not happy that she was there. After a while, this person, it was a male, dissipated and floated off. And I kind of came back into the front. And so those 3 things that happened in this fairly compressed time period of maybe 5 days were really the first experience that I had that was kind of all piled on together,
it's a hell of a run. three for 3 at bat.
3 for 3 on that made me really accept the reality of magic, even though I'd had experiences that had me believing that. It moved from being a belief to something else. It supported that my discomfort with a lot of the stuff that I had read about magic made sense, because this was not the kind of experiences that I was generally reading about. And it also kind of cemented that there were that the individual spirits, whatever they were, could appear to you and interact with you and do stuff to you or through you, or make choices, or offer you choices, offer you changes. And then even the basic kind of animist thing of being really clear that I asked for the path to open and it did.
It did, yes.
Right? Which is classic magic.
That's right.
To the crows giving me information that would help my friend's mother know that I wasn't full of shit.
Yeah.
Right? But choosing not to show themselves. So you go, okay, there's so much spirit and so much of a very other reality that happened over that course of time. And that place has consistently done that to me over the years. But that's really, so the Man in Black and that first run at Shasta were my initiations into the spirit world, I would say.
I love it. The reason I bring up experiences is because, and why experience is so central to spirits, is that to go on the metaphor that I used earlier about gravity is that unlike gravity or other phenomena, we don't have a clear-cut way to measure, record, or any kind of an evidence-based system to prove spirits as being ontologically real. What we do have is a sheer number of experiences, very much like what you just shared, Aidan. And I have them myself, and people around the world since we were first able to have any kind of a consciousness. This is something that we do. And what we have right now is a bit of a conundrum between experience and evidence, I would say. Right now we live in a society, as we all know, where evidence is the sole arbiter of what is real. But I think that fissures are starting to appear. I'm thankful for them. One of the best places for people to go to look into this kind of thing, the biggest fissure right now is within contemporary anthropology. And there's a lot of superstars, people that I've talked about in the podcast time and time again. But one of them, my favorite, is Dr. Edith Turner. She's wonderful. She wrote a book called Experiencing Ritual. And she had an experience, a very crazy experience. She was studying a group of people in Zambia. They were called the Ndambu. And they had a healing ceremony for somebody who was very ill. The ceremony itself, the ritual, was called the Ihamba. Now, in her words, she says the word that she went native. And this is something that anthropologists for a long period of time were warned against doing. They say, look, you need to be objective about absolutely everything. But again, fissures are starting to appear, even though objectivism is very important to anthropology. And she had an experience while she was involved in this ritual. It was a full-day ritual. And I'll just read a little segment of what she experienced here. Again, she wrote a whole book about this, and I would highly suggest the book, but just a note here. She said, "The traditional doctor bent down amid the singing and drumming to extract the harmful spirit. I saw with my own eyes a large gray blob of something like plasma emerge from the sick woman's back. Then I knew the Africans were right. There is spirit stuff. There is spirit affliction. It isn't a matter of metaphor and symbol or even psychology." I'm perplexed by this because she was a tenured professor and she had a reputation. Why would she even do this? People would say, well, she just made it all up and she didn't really see, or maybe she was drugged, or maybe she was dosed with something. I don't think so. I think a lot of anthropologists might have this kind of experience. At least Edith felt brave enough to share them. And again, this is only one experience. Aidan, do you have stories from, because we're good as magicians or people that are fascinated by this kind of stuff, because people will open up to us. They won't open up to their families, but they'll come to us and they'll basically say, dude, I had this thing where I woke up and there was an old woman just standing at the edge of the bed and I was terrified and I just stared at her for 5 minutes and then eventually she just went away. Do you have any stories of people that you know who are full-blown materialist, evidence-based scientific people that opened up to you and be like, I had this experience? Has that happened to you?
I have absolutely had that go on, partially because of the blog and then with 6 Ways.
Right.
That a number of people are out there reading kind of voraciously, trying to find stuff that addresses the things that they've experienced, right, and not finding that address. I think it's just kind of my openness to a wide variety of possibility, mm-hmm, and not being dogmatic about how this stuff goes down or what it is, that I do get contacted from people that go, either this happened to me when I was a kid and I've never known what it was, and I usually don't have an answer. They're usually looking for, do you know what it was? And right. Usually all you can tell them is, this is very common. Yeah. Contrary to modern belief because of that evidence-based thing, right? Or, my brother has had people that know that I'm an occultist or whatever it is that I am, who will kind of reach out and go, does your brother have any suggestion? Because I was in some other country and I did something stupid and I think something was done to me in turn. I try and refer those people to someone that might be able to help them, because that's not really what I do. No. And so I think it does go on, but it's you are stepping over into batshit crazy territory as soon as you start talking about this stuff. And I kind of wish that more people in the magical world would be really upfront about these things going on, because it isn't entirely normal to the human experience.
I think that's what shocks most people. When people do come up to me, since I came out of this magic closet, the first thing I say is, hey man, it's normal. Like it's really normal what you had. So I just want them to know right off the bat.
Yeah, I think I've shared this story, but I'm not sure when or where, so I don't know if it's recorded or not. But the folks that I learned jewelry from, my friends Mark and Pam, at one point, Pam was on a sales trip. This is before that before they moved all their business online, and Mark is now passed. But this was quite a while ago. I want to say it was in the 90s, maybe end of the 90s. Anyway, she had a sales trip to San Diego, and I was in between jobs, and so they asked if I would go out there with her just to make sure, to help out. She was having some health issues, and so we did. And while we were there, she said, there's a guy who does Taoist energy medicine here, and I'd like to go see him, and you want to come along? And I said, absolutely, And so we went to see this guy, and he was an American, I think, a Caucasian man. He taught Tai Chi extensively and has written books on it, and Qigong and things like that, but he had a healing practice. Mm-hmm. And so we went in, and we were talking about it, and he could tell we were crazy, we dyed hair and shaved heads and tattoos and stuff and jewelry to go. There was no question that he had to be any particular way with us. So I think we might have gotten slightly different treatment than
no doubt
others would have. He said, okay, well, I want to, told Pam, he said, I'd like to check you out and see what we can see here, see if I can help you out. And he said, so I asked if I could be, let me know how close I can be to this, because I would like to see what you're doing. But he said, okay. And so he said, I'm going to turn down the lights because that helps me. And that was the point where I was like, okay, this guy might be for real, because I had learned that you want very little light if possible to do some kinds of work, because what you're going to see is pretty subtle, but there's usually this light aspect to it, right?
Yeah, very much.
And it'll help you see stuff. And so he turned down the lights, and I think he was doing some massage on stuff, and then he shifted to this kind of hands above her energy work. He made a few motions, and this fairly large, like 6-inch across is my sense of it, black butterfly looking entity flew out of her and off through a corner of the room. And I think I laughed. And he looked at me and said, in a totally questioning and confused way, he said, "You saw that?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "Nobody sees that stuff," But again, so now here you have a guy that is a professional medical practitioner, right? He's licensed to do this stuff. Yeah. And has he ever mentioned that this is part of what's going on with it? Probably not, right? No. Because you're batshit crazy.
That's right.
If he's telling people he doesn't need to, it's not necessary for his work, right? To say, yeah, I'm doing this work, and sometimes I actually am removing entities or energies that take particular entity-like form, and then I can get them out of the body, right? Because that just shuts you off, and you are a crazy motherfucker. But it's kind of sad, because there's people that are seeing these things, I think very frequently, are self-medicating to try and make it stop, or are very confused and very disturbed because they do accept that they are batshit crazy, or they wouldn't be seeing these things. And I always go back, I know I've talked about this one in public on a podcast somewhere, but I said, I take this Occam's razor view about spirit, except I go somewhere that people don't go with this, which is they usually go, well, the simplest explanation is that we can't measure it, we can't see it, we can't reproduce it, so it doesn't exist, right? Yeah. And I go, okay, this is discussed in every culture up until modern times, for as long as we have recorded history. So the simplest answer is that it goes on. Yeah, very right? Much so. The fact that we have lost the ability to perceive it overall, and I don't think that is as widespread as people think.
No.
But again, it's a good way to get yourself institutionalized or get yourself ostracized.
Yes.
Probably get yourself killed. We learned that during, the last period of time. That's a great way to get executed. Yeah, it's there, and it's difficult to explain in any way that makes sense in the modern world. But again, I think if you take that view that this is human normal, so get over it and
lean into it, I say.
And lean into it, yeah.
Yeah. To go back to the scenario, and it's hopefully this is the last time I'll bring up the scenario. It's if the more braver souls, if I can call them that, they'll say something like, "Look, you don't believe this, right? Like, you don't actually believe this. This is all in your head in some way, man. This is all in your head, man." Or that there's totally rational explanations for all of this, And I'm just going to go through a couple of them. There's the first one, which is like a social theory. This was mainly put through by Durkheim. He said that we socially construct focal points for us to worship, and this is just something that we do so that we have a common ideal, we have a common identity. And it's something that you just literally brought up, is that, well, then why are people still ostracized? And even back in the day, people, when what they were experiencing, when they bring it up, they would be ostracized as well. So there's a little something there. There's another thing as well, that it's all psychological. It brings stability to our world. It provides an explanation for illnesses and natural effects that happen in the world. It's how we deal with uncertainty. And the last one is a kind of cognitive theory that we have, is that we're hardwired. We are, as humans, hardwired to see human attributes in the non-human, in everything around us, be they animals or rock formations. It's just what we do, clouds even. We just don't understand the world or ourselves. There's been pushback again, and it comes from anthropology. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of David Hufford. He wrote a book called The Terror That Comes in the Night, about night hags, basically. Mm-hmm. And I love this guy. His books are unreal. He's retired now, but he's still ongoing. There'll be a show note. He says, like, look, this is normal. There are experiences, and here's the thing, is that all of these beliefs of spirits, they don't come from a psychological model. They come from the experiences themselves. So he takes a very phenomenological approach. It is a hypothesis. And I do tend to think this, is that I think the experiences came first. That to me seems far more natural than the natural way of seeing that it's all because of natural processes. I know I've used the word natural quite a bit, but it keeps with the experience, I think, and that is a very important thing. Do you think that it's all in our heads at all? or just part of it?
I don't. I think, I talk about this in Weaving Fate, I think, more than I do in Six Ways, but the reality is that everything that we experience while embodied is happening through this structure, right? Which, right. A lot of water and a lot of neurology, various kinds of tissues. But so yes, everything that we are experiencing and perceiving, we are perceiving through our perceptual filters based on the body, right? I take that, no question. And I also think that the usual argument for this, which is kind of contained in the way that question is set, which is, it's all in your head, means therefore it's not real.
Correct.
Right? And this is the thing I always say, is like, the thing that's interesting about the placebo effect is that people are healed with it. Yeah. It's not what people think. Yeah. People go, yeah, you just believe that was true and you were healed. And I go, and what's the problem with that?
Right.
The goal is healing, right? We don't really care, right? Beyond that, in general. Have you read The Black Faith by Dorji Bonzarov?
I have not, no.
I've mentioned Bonzarov a few times, and I found him, he is mentioned in Shamanism by Eliade, and for some reason, the phrase, the Black Faith, caused me to go and look it up, and it's available on JSTOR. It's about maybe 70 pages of text. It's been translated and is in a compendium somewhere, I can't remember, but it's probably my favorite piece of writing about this stuff. Mm-hmm. Because Bonzarov was a Mongolian who is writing to kind of bag on the other anthropologists of his time's views of Mongolian shamanism. And he basically is going, these are the places where you are missing the point because you don't understand the culture and you're not taking it seriously. Right? What Bonzarov says, and this is a terrible paraphrase, he says it very beautifully, as he says, the anthropologists roll through and they see what's going on among these people. And they say, these people believe that these rocks are alive and these rocks have agency and this tree has power. So all trees have power. And he goes, but they're thinking that this is linked to the stone, right, or linked to the tree. Whereas the people who are experiencing it are aware that there is an indweller in the stone, that there's an indweller in the tree, that there's an indwelling spirit. So it's not that necessarily every stone has an indweller that you can interact with.
Right.
but some do. And some of those may be friendly and some of those may be hostile, right? But I thought it was a brilliant thing, because this is from the 1800s, that at that point you had someone saying, y'all are throwing your own perspectives all over this other view and dumbing it down to fit your perception of what's going on.
Yeah.
And if you would actually have not discounted this and go, oh, cute, they think the rock has a spirit in it, but said, tell me about this. Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah.
You know, what's that spirit like? Is that the same for all rocks of that kind, right? Yeah. And it's an interesting thing. And that's why I love that book so much. He does this in a few places. There's a few places where he wrote just amazing paragraphs that I wish were more well read, because I think it goes very directly at this question, which is, and the same point that you came to, which is these things come from the experience.
Yep.
We don't make something up from nothing.
No.
Stories have roots, even if they're shitty stories, right? And so if we look at very potent stories that kind of guided cultures and guided civilization sometimes for hundreds, if not thousands of generations, there's something there. It's not that your ancestors were more stupid than you.
Never.
Right? If we go back 12,000 years, their brains were bigger. So they were likely sharper than you. It's just it's a fascinating subject all the way around. I definitely don't think that it's all in your head in the way that that's meant. I think, yes, you are perceiving it through your head.
Well, what isn't, really?
And so that's something that you have to be aware of, right? I've talked about this a lot in different places. You have to know that because that thing shows up to you as, a 7-foot-tall purple unicorn, that doesn't mean it's a 7-foot-tall purple unicorn. Right. That's how you are perceiving the experience that you're having. That's the image that you're making to make sense of what's occurring. I don't know that it matters what you saw. What matters is that you saw something, or that you experienced something that was intense enough that your neurology had to try and put a shape on, right, so you could engage with it.
The phenomenon still exists regardless.
It exists regardless. What you're talking about is your experience of it.
Yeah.
Those are different things.
Even within the occult and the paranormal, there's even been ways of explaining information gleamed from... Oh, there's some thunder. Information gleamed from the spirit world. And this is a hypothesis that it's gaining a bit more traction now. It's called super psi. And it basically just goes to the fact that any information that you've gotten from the spirits is literally just you seeing your future. It's an interesting little thought to sit with. I do enjoy things like Eric Wargo and time loops and whatnot. But that doesn't explain away a lot of the sensory input that I get from the spirit world. Sure, if I ask the spirit to do something and then it happens, was that just me seeing it by the ritual itself of me talking to the spirit? Was that me just seeing forward into my future? And it's something fun to play with. I don't know if you have ever played with such an idea at all, Aidan.
I definitely have contact. I believe that I have contact with future selves of mine.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that was very intentional on my part.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I saw a good argument for trying that and have used it to some effect. Whatever is really going on, that's how I perceive it. I don't think I buy that as a grand explanation. I think, does it go on? Sure. I think time is very strange. One of the things that I really liked, I believe it comes out on the first place I heard it was in the At Stockholm album by Genesis P-Orridge and Carl Abrahamson's band White Stains.
Okay.
When he says, time is that which emits, right? Which is an interesting little game because it's, just flipped around. If you have that idea that our sense of time is just simply the order that we experience phenomena arising, apparently, I don't see a reason to think that that's more than, again, just the perception.
I immediately go to, why not both? It's just like, why not both things? Like, there's spirits and there's super psi. Like, there's no reason.
And I'm 100% with that.
Yeah. Another thing that will get used against people who have some kind of inkling of the occult, I'm going to bring it up because it has been used against me, is that when Aleister Crowley, he did his version based on MacGregor Mather's The Lesser Key of Solomon, or the Ars Goetia. He says in that the 72 demons that one can summon, they're all just aspects of your brain. They're all just you. And this I don't know what he was doing or whether he was going through his atheistic phase or maybe he had a bad morning or something like that. I agree with Stephen Skinner when he says that set back occultism, specifically how we approach spirits, set us back 75 years. Because for a long period of time, we did have a lot of people, Butler and people following Dion Fortune, that just said it was all psychological. It's all just in our minds. And then I even get the people like, look, even Crowley, the greatest magician of the 20th century, says that it's in your mind. And it's just, for me, I don't get why this is an argument anymore when so many people have experienced this kind of thing. Aidan, I have to ask, why do we find the idea of agency so disquieting? If people don't know what agency is, it's an ability for things to act on some scale that's not predetermined or random. We live in a world of what is considered naturalism, so that's everything is due to natural laws and natural evolves. We've taken life out of biology in some way, and we've made everything very passive, I'd say. Why do people find agency outside of biology incredibly, or even inside biology in some way, incredibly disquieting? Why do you think that is?
I think we have just a rampant case, and it's gotten worse over time. I link it to the modern world, though I have no real way of knowing, and that's just based on kind of inner experiences with much older forms of people, and I don't know that those are, again, real in any way anybody would care to take my word for it. There's a crazy myth to me about human supremacy, that we are incredibly special. And so everything special at a certain level comes from us. And that everything else is basically, and you find this written in texts from, I think, the 1800s is where I've seen it, of dumb nature, right? Nature is an automaton that is just running patterns, right? And I think that it's absurd. We've not been around, even if you take my view of humanity as being a couple million years old, because I think we were pretty much like we are for that long in the ways that matter to me. We're still little blips. So then this was generated as a playground for us that some billions of years later we would get to come and hang out in. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think it's absurd. I don't know. I find it very interesting. I was thinking about how people talk about animals, right? This is a weird one, and we'll see where I go with it. But I've had now 5, but I currently have 3 living, very large livestock guardian dogs. And these are borderline not dogs, right? Each of them to different levels. One that is gone now, Angie, was the most like it. She was a dog that was like a puma. She was so crazy smart and so crazy experiencing her own world in a very active way.
No, Aidan. So she was tangle of instincts and
totally.
and behavior.
But it's interesting, right? And then I have another one that's like that now, Emmy. And I was talking to somebody. We were talking about the fact that they'll kill rabbits or armadillos or whatever wander through. And they said, well, do they eat them? And I said, well, sometimes they'll eat them, And they said, well, that's, it's just, their argument was interesting. I wish I could remember what they said, but basically what they were suggesting was, well, this is proof that they don't have full-on consciousness, because if they had the consciousness to really see that other life form as being equal to them, they wouldn't treat it the way they do. And I, of course, then look at humans, because that's the most human thing I've ever heard anybody say about an animal. And I go, so what's wrong with us that we do know all of that, and then we do unbelievably horrible things? What if, this was the thing that got me in trouble with this person, they don't talk to me anymore. I said, so what if my dog, who absolutely appears to be in love with rabbits and in love with coyotes, but who will absolutely kill them if they come into her yard, what if what I read of her singing with the coyotes every night, because she does, is still true, that she truly does love those animals, but there's a line you don't cross. And so she will then take them out. But this doesn't change what she feels about them. For us, we restore it, right? We go, oh, this person was evil. This person, blah, blah, blah. It's very easy, right? And so I think it's just about humans thinking that they're special. And then we might be able to give it to animals because we can touch them and we can see them and we might think they're cute or we might think that they're bad. It's very interesting. It's like we think about all the things that we'll give agency to, and most of it is only if it's viewed as negative to us, right? We'll give agency to storms or to sicknesses if they do us harm, all of that stuff. But yeah, I just think that it's people thinking that they're way more special than I think we are.
This brings us quite nicely into the idea of animism. Now, that was what initially attracted me to Six Ways, was when you used the A word. Because I bang on a lot about it in my podcast, and a lot of people say, Doug, your podcast is literally just like low-level animism. You're not really talking about magic. In a way, I'm kind of like, well, bingo. But how would you describe animism? Give me the elevator pitch for animism and how you see it.
Yeah, for me, animism is the overarching idea and experience that many, many things, both easily perceptible and some that are not so easily perceptible, are functionally sentient and functionally, therefore, alive, even if they don't have a body, which is kind of our definition, right? So how is something that doesn't have a body or something that doesn't have a respiration or something like a stone, but it's functionally alive and it's functionally sentient? Because again, this is us perceiving it, so I'm not going to nail it down that far. And that because of that, there are a lot of potential allies and a lot of potential things that one could cross in a way that you can have effect from, for better or worse for you. And to me, that's what animism is.
How do spirits fit into animism? Because I know a lot of people would think that with animism, they'd say animism is you're dealing with animals. Where do spirits enter? Well, animism comes from anima, which is soul, right? So, and then they go, okay, how do spirits fit into your animism, Aidan?
The spirits is what we perceive when we're interacting with these kind of other beings. And that's why I said early on at the beginning of the show, I have no idea what they really are, right? And it's purely experiential. There's a point that you hit, if you hit it, where you go, okay, there are a lot more, whatever you want to call them, beings, I'll just use beings, or spirits, if you want to use that word, that operate and behave as if sentient and as if they have agency. And this place is crawling with them, is my experience. It's like we're deeply enmeshed in that universe. But they do all sorts of very interesting things, and we can kind of see that there are sections or subsets of them that do kind of particularly interesting kinds of things. And I think until you've had some experience with some aspect of that, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that what we're talking about is nonsense, right? It's experiential.
The thing that kind of gets on me as well is that people are very object-based when I try to talk to them about animism. They'll be like, well, okay, so I can get that you might think that, there's a soul within trees, there's a soul within your dog, and I get that. But things like fax machines or even places, that's where I draw the line. And I just say, well, I don't know if it's a cumulative effect to these things, because I am positive that most people have been to a place that just utterly sang to them. And you could just be like, well, I'm having a weird point in my life, or I explain it this way. And I just say, go back to the experience. Just head back to the experience and see that it could be a multitude of spirits, but you can go to places, or you can look at and hold objects within your hand that has a story that seems beyond human, and in a way seems like it is imbued with some kind of life, which is the great thing about animism. It is the Goldilocks porridge of metaphysics for magic, in my opinion. And that's why one of the major reasons that I think that animism is, for now, we need to get back to a new kind of animism, or just old animism, for me. A couple of things that I would be remiss if I did not bring it up, but the idea of interventionist spirits. Something seems to advance when people lean into spirit magic. The obvious examples that people like to go to within magic circles are things like Jack Parsons. I think that's a very easy example. People will say, like, well, we wouldn't have gone to the moon if Jack Parsons wasn't there. People will also bring up the idea of John Dee and the English Empire, but I think that's very simplified. From what you read, if you start to read a lot of books on history, which I do, is that it wasn't just John Dee that was doing angel magic. There was probably a group of at least 60 people in all kinds of echelons of political and court intrigue, not just in England, but in France and most likely in Spain. For some reason, the idea of empire was really, really big for them. I'm wondering if you think that there have been moments where some major advance occurs within either human consciousness or throughout history where we could maybe point and go like, something might have just gone. In a way, I would agree with you that we're not overly special, but also kind of we are. Symbolic thinking, whatever we're calling our kind of consciousness. I think that there has been small segments where the complexity of history seems to jump forward in some really strange way. What would you say to that, Aidan?
I mean, I think it's a reasonable thing. I am personally fond of some stories that tie into that. So the stories that around the Nephilim and the Watchers, I think are very interesting. Because I think that they're explanatory of something, and that something is a particular perception, not necessarily a particular event, right? And again, my focus has really not been on Western magic, so it's hard for me to tie into that. But I will say that I saw interesting things in Dee's Mirror when I was around that, and I saw quite a bit of interesting stuff in there. I think that there are spirits that are very interested in us.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of go to the idea of categories. So I've had a number of, trance-based, what are really incredibly classical things from looking at kind of the anthropology of what gets lumped together as shamanism, of dismemberment and reassembly, right?
Okay.
Where you're in a particular place and the spirits of that place literally cut you apart and remove your bones and maybe burn them and do this stuff. And it's a strange experience. And it's actually, for me, it has never actually been super unpleasant because it's so interesting. And one of the things that I came about with that is going like, there's a chunk of spirits that just do that. That's like what they do. I don't know why they do that to us, but for me, at least, it's been beneficial when it's happened. And so the idea that there are spirits that are interested in particular directions of pushing things, I think is very reasonable. I've not personally had anything like that going. Well, the shop spirits have been very clearly up my ass about both the talismanic work that I do and the books that I write. So that's an argument that one could say. They are very much like, you do this now. Okay, now you do this. It's like, okay, you keep working, you keep things going as positive as they are, and I'll continue playing. You have not steered me wrong ever, so I don't have any issues with that. And so, yeah, do I think that happens on all the time? Probably. Do I think it happens on a wide scale? Probably. I think if you have people who are deeply tied into a particular concept, like empire, right, or even Western civilization, what kind of spirits are they going to attract? They're going to attract spirits that are interested in, right? I think about Rome, and you look at the rise of Rome. Rome at some point hit a particular pattern, and I think it's quite reasonable to think that they developed kind of a spirit ecology that was highly supportive of what they were doing. I think this is probably true with Genghis Khan, right? You go,
good old
people.
Temujin.
This has always been around,
yeah.
And so why would those things not influence people? And again, we accept it if it's in a particular format and if it's away from us, right? So we will accept that in Jesus.
Right.
We will accept that in Muhammad. We will accept that whoever. But
crossing the border to the spirit world, that's where we draw the line.
But you're not supposed to do that, and it's not supposed to happen to you because you are a suburban kid living in California in 1975, right? Yeah.
The idea, and the fans, they're clamoring to know, and I have to throw it in. Are aliens spirits?
I would argue that how could they not be?
Right.
Or do they at least have them, right? Yeah. Again, I have a really biological view of things, and it's probably a character flaw. But I do view that we are teeny tiny subset of a piece, a vast, vast organism. And I believe that personally what's going on as we connect to what I call the field, and as we connect to spirits, and as we connect to the currents of magic, or as we connect to kind of serious levels of psi events or alien experiences. These are all manifestations of that phenomena arising from the field, right? Is the term that I use in Weaving Faith.
Right.
We can try and say that they're all the same thing, which I think is probably wrong.
Yeah.
Or we can say they are all 100% distinct, which I think is probably equally wrong.
Right.
Right? It's like saying, no, the cells of your liver are unlike the cells in your heart or your brain. And you go, well, yes. And no. So I fall into that zone.
They share traits. Yeah.
I have had interesting experiences that probably, if I was wired a little differently, I would say were, extraterrestrial based.
Right.
But that's not my wiring. I can see it that way. And I've talked to people who have had the extraterrestrial version. Yeah. And so some of that, again, falls into that perceptual model.
Yeah.
We're wired to perceive in different ways.
Very much so.
And we get different stories. We create different narratives about them. Different mythologies arise from them.
Exactly.
So I'm open to the majority of it.
Some of my favorite literature regarding these kind of things, people like Whitley Strieber or Jeffrey Kripal, Jacques Vallée, even Graham Hancock through his book Supernatural, is that the details and functions of these encounters, they differ only on the detail level, but the underlying effect of the encounter seems comparatively similar to spirit experiences, and going through alien abductions to fairies to all of these things. It's that you are correct. It could be, are they similar exactly? No. On the other scale, are they completely different? No. They share attributes, and we need to put on our comparative glassware and have a look at them, because yes, cosmonauts saw angels when they were in space. Was that just because they were hardwired, as you say, to see angels, right? This is one of these things. Mm-hmm. The experience still stays there. The details of them differ greatly. And if this is interesting for people, there's so much to go on here. What about multidimensional beings? Are these multidimensional beings? Are we somehow quantum physically being tinkered with by some kind of archon? What is happening? Do you think that's...
I don't know. I don't think about that stuff too much. Personally, it's not my world.
Right.
Multi-dimensions? Sure, I have no problem with that. Again, I think I'm not bagging on humanity too much, though there are places where I absolutely could go there. But in most of these things where I'm saying that I'm really not down on us in this sense. But we have an incredible tendency to just limit everything into really, really box after box after box. And it rarely serves us. There are very specific places it does, right? So epidemiology. Yeah. This is useful. If you can find the cause of that thing, then yes, you can perhaps find a way to work around it. But this kind of has become the belief structure, the unquestioned belief structure and the religious structure of our time.
Even in magic, Aidan, I find it that's just like, specifically with things like Kabbalah, where it's just, there's a neat compartment for everything, and you have a book of correspondences, and everything is A to B. It drives me fucking crazy.
And it's tricky when you aren't wired to that, or you haven't wired yourself to it, right? Because that's, for most people, that's not, you learn that system, and it takes work to do that. And it's funny for me, because it's like, I straight up have this weird ass Paleolithic, sometimes as far as kind of Neanderthal experience of the spirit world, right? I don't think that that's all that's going on. I don't think that that's necessarily even an accurate representation of what's going on.
Right.
That's just the interface that works for me. Because then there's really funny stuff. I'd almost made it into Weaving Fate, and I decided I would be kind and only talk about her in podcasts. But I have this fire spirit that I interact with, and this is trance stuff where I go and I walk out into fire. It shows up, and it's really funny. But it's really kind of like, it is kind of like, if you think about fiery kind of humanoid demons, right? Scary human, it's got that thing going on. But it's not menacing, but it's pretty intense more than anything else. Yeah. And it shows up as this kind of like, maybe like Lucifer from the Sandman comics usually. So it's usually like almost got a body, and it's lots of flames and like really intense in the face, and it likes to show up where you aren't expecting to see it, even though you're going to visit it. It's kind of funny, and it clearly gets pleasure out of my response to this form. It's amused. And it's always been amused, because it's like, it is the most like fiery Lucifer fire spirit you could find, right?
Archetypical.
It's like it's a joke. It's like an archetypal joke that this entity is doing, right? A couple of years ago, I went in and it showed up as Persia Newman, who is Gary Newman's daughter, and who sings and is in the video for his song, My Name is Ruin, which had come out about 3 months before this started. And it was dressed as her from the video. So now this thing that used to be super intimidating and scary is now this really cute little apocalypse closed out blonde girl of like 11 or something, 12. And it showed up as that way. And I just started laughing because I was like, this one's better. This one's funnier.
I'll take this one, please.
This one is funny. And it totally was like straight up. It said, I take stuff from your mind to have a way to interact with you, because I am nothing like this. And it's the only one that has said that on its own, but I have had that experience with others. You're just using what's available to have this experience with you. So I'm very open as to what any of these things are. I truly don't know.
This is something Gordon White has said. I'm just wondering what you think about it. But he's commented once that the gods are in your head, the spirits aren't. Now, there's many ways of taking this. The aspects of spirits that we like and that we can somehow personify, we classify as gods, but the spirits underneath them, the things that they are doing, those are separate in some way. What do you think about the idea of gods merely just
I've wondered about that question, because I've heard that quote. I don't remember where he said it, but my experience is somewhat different, but it brings me maybe to the same place, which is, to me, that the gods are inaccessible. And this could be a personality style thing, because I know people that don't have that experience. But for me, the gods are removed from interest in my process. And this is why I don't work with them. I have had experiences with them, but the ones that I've had serious experiences with have shown me that they are not the thing that most people are probably interacting with. One of the things that I've just mentioned this to somebody in the Six Ways group is the sisters. The sisters are another entity that they work with frequently. Suggested me at one point in my life that I should find a Woden to work with, and
take a number.
It just snapped something in my head around that concept of like, oh, so what if the thing that became Woden or Odin, depending on what part of the world you were in, was a particular impression of a whole class of beings? Because that's what they were suggesting. They're like, the Wodens do this. This thing that you want to do. We don't do that, but the Wodens do that. So you can go find the Wodens and they'd be down. And so, I did, and they were. And so now I have this very interesting thing, because now I'm moving more into the idea or the question of how much of these spirits that we view as being like us, or like singular being, right, which we like to think of ourselves as, are really collective organisms of some form that we just tend to perceive in a way that is more logical to us. Versus, which explains, the sisters were comfortable showing up as individual or 2 or 3 at a time of these women that they knew that I would find them interesting and comfortable, until they needed to do something which was much more like, and they went from being totally like you and I talking comprehensible to some kind of deep pattern language. When they made that shift, they no longer communicated the same at all. And so, so it's an interesting one. It's like, did we attach to that thing? Were the Wodens a particular class of beings that tribes worked with, that in time maybe we did that thing that everybody says we do, that there was a dynasty of powerful people that we then said, so this is a manifestation of that thing. Does that then in time become Woden or Odin? I don't know. It's an interesting concept, though.
It certainly is. One of the things that's really incredibly fascinating to me is the idea of performance and spirits. If people are interested in spirits, but more so on the side of spiritualism and mediums and whatnot, which I find is just so woefully underexamined by magicians these days. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jack Hunter. He writes a lot of really great books about this kind of stuff. But one of the things he's fascinated with, and if you want spirit magic and to kind of have an anthropological hold on them, get Jack's books. It'll put you above most people that are already into this kind of thing, because he really lays it out there, as well as things like animism and whatnot. But he's big on the idea of somehow performance. In our minds, we've tilted it to the idea that performance means pretend. That if you're doing something performative, that you were pretending. For a lot of cultures, performance was the point at which you meet the spirit world, or for them to almost come through in some way. And for people to maybe try and understand this, I'll give you a spiritualism example. There's many cases, and you can go through them, people who go to a medium. Back in the 19th century, they go to a medium, and the medium starts their process, and almost immediately they do something that is so obvious to be like trickery. Like it's just, Houdini could have spotted from a mile away, just like, what are you doing? Like, this is just dumb. I just saw you do something here. And there's these experiences of these people walking out of the room. But for those that remain, that are skeptical, they say maybe after this weird trickery, 15 to 20 minutes later, something incredibly insane happens. Hands appearing and writing, people levitating, very incredible stuff. And I think there's something here about the idea of, we've mixed up that performance and trickery might be a way for them to log on. It's like the unspoken rule somehow of mediumship is that you do a little bit of tinkering beforehand, and that might open up the door a little bit. Rituals could be a way of getting their attention, specifically for magic. Aidan, I want to get your opinion on this. Do you think that somehow trickery and performance is noticed by the spirit world or spirits themselves?
What I would say is that I think that the performance aspect can be very important, because again, we're going into something that I go into a lot in Weaving Fate. It's about language. It's a language, and it's a way of communicating. And so if you don't view it like someone is trying to pull a fast one over on you, right? Yeah. But you go, okay, this is a way to change the sense of the room, the sense of reality. Yeah. Then this is a language that can be used to engage. And this is very common if we look at like the anthropology, as skewed as most of it is around, shamanism, understanding that that's a problematic word, but it is intended to speak to a wide variety of practices, not to say that they're the same, but to say that they bear similarities, right? Mm-hmm. Is I think the intelligent understanding of that word, and understanding that it's not always used that way. So it still is a problem. We just don't have a better word. We see this all the time, right? It's kind of like costumes, right? Mm-hmm. Why does it work to dress up as the scary, powerful shaman, to interact with something that, as I like to bring up about the spirits all the time, theoretically don't have eyes, right? They can't see you necessarily, but there's something that you're doing. You can put on a particular persona that will work better to interact in different situations than others. So again, to kind of go back to a personal thing that is what this brought up for me is, I remember I was having an incredibly hard time a number of years ago, and I asked my allies, is there one thing that I can do to improve our relationship so that it works better? And they responded, approach from a position of power. And I went, oh, okay. I get that, right? Because I am straight up more likely to help the person that comes in and says, hey, I've got this issue, can you help me? Rather than the person who is totally like beating around the bush and I'm so sorry to have to ask, blah, 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 blah. And so it really changed the way that I interacted with spirits. And I believe that that is partially performative. I don't necessarily feel that, but I'm not going to come into my space if I'm trying to do big work. If I need just solace, I do that with my spirits too. And I'll come in and go, I'm a fucking mess. But if I'm trying to do big work, I'm going to get my head on straight. I'm going to put on my jewelry. I'm going to put on my talismans. I'm going to do what it takes to get really solid and really grounded. And then I'm going to wander into the space I'm going to work in and going, okay, we're doing this. And it's not a command. It's just being as clear as possible.
Concise.
Right?
Concise
and really upfront. And so I think part of this performative thing ties into that. Right? So if I am doing sleight of hand to indicate manifestation, demanifestation, this is beginning to explain. It's a particular kind of language that explains what we're doing, right? As is most ritual. Most ritual work can be viewed as language, I think. Like, what is this language speaking? And this is why systems that have very codified ways of working with the spirits, though it's not what I do, work very well, because everyone involved knows what all of the stage settings mean. They know what all the stage directions mean. They know, oh, we're going into that. We're going into the 20 minutes of nonstop praying. This means we are supposed to pay attention. And they know what goes on, right? We've set the whole stage. Everybody knows their part in the play. And so I think that performance it can be really critical. It can get in the way.
Yeah.
It depends on the relationship. Most of my work is very non-performative now, but I think the work that I did early on allowed that in some ways.
I was just going to say, one of the things that bothers me about, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Skoll experiment. Some of the most interesting stuff you can read up about mediumship, it happened sometime in the early 90s. With things like pieces of film being written on in triple locked containers. They brought in the Society for Psychical Research, and they were completely flabbergasted. But there's one thing that they did not allow, is that it would happen in a very enclosed space, basement cellar. Lights go off, and then manifestation occurs, but they did not allow the Society for Psychical Research to bring in a camera, a night vision camera. That's the one thing that they did not allow. And immediately skeptics will be like, well, that's just obviously that they're doing some trickery. And I'm not trying to make excuses for this group, but if you read up about the Skoll experiment, it's unbelievable. I think that perhaps, again, it might be some kind of unwritten rule that maybe at the beginning, to get the ball rolling, they have to do a little bit of trickery, and then somehow spirits occur. And if this trickery was caught on film, immediately the Society for Psychical Research closes the book. It's like, right now we know that it's fake. So maybe the mediums that were sitting in on the Skoll experiment, they're just like, we can't let this out because we are using trickery to begin with. But what happens after this is incredible. It's one of those things that
it's a very interesting concept, because I think that if we view that kind of trickery or sleight of hand or performative stuff as being like tools of the threshold, right? These are like crossroads tools.
Right.
One of the things that didn't make it into this book, but will make it into another one, is a practice that I've used for a long time when I was living out in the country. It works in the city, but there's so many distractions in the city that it's harder to work.
Tell me about it.
But what I found, and I found this, I guess it was before I was living in the country, really. It was when I was staying out in the woods and cabins, is I would say it was going to get dark at 6 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, I would go and grab some blankets and make myself a little seat, so that I could see both the door frame in front of me. I'm sitting on the threshold of the door, so one leg is on the inside, and half of my body is on the inside, and the other side of my body is on the outside. And I would take the first half hour to just like breathe, so that I was relaxed enough that I could just kind of experience the shifting between those two spaces, right? This is stupid. There's nothing going on. Right? But what I found was that it did kind of crazy break my head open stuff to being able to perceive.
Right.
That I would see distinctly different things. And so depending on what I was working on, sometimes I would see manifestations in the room as the room would get darker before the outside would, because the walls would keep it no lights or anything on. Right. Or I would see the reverse, so I would see crazy peripheral stuff in the outside. Why? I don't know. It's like I'm playing very clearly with this concept of thresholds, doors, crossroads, right? Yeah. And I don't know that the specific of that thing is at all what matters. But again, in a sense, it's performative. In a sense, it's saying, I am now literally in multiple worlds. What occurs if I'm doing the work that I'm doing, well, standing in multiple worlds, or something that Lonnie and I talked about in the most recent podcast I did with him for his Weird Web Radio, is casting kind of involved protective circles in the woods and then leaving them to do the work.
Okay.
because I found that the circles called incredible levels of activity, but they functioned as too much of a filter.
Right.
So if I use that as the light to draw the moths, which only works given my sense of these things, that's not something that is necessarily recommended. And it depends on what kind of spirits you're working with and how you feel about them. But it was, again, that's a strange little performance, right? I did 20 minutes of setting up this structure, and then I walk outside so I can witness what it brought. I think it's an important piece that can be used, that it's not critical to everything, but it's definitely useful.
Right. As a fan of your work, this is totally a fan question from me, Doug Batchelor. I'm just wondering, have you ever at any point done any kind of Solomonic magic or worked with a grimoire, say like the Grimoire Verum or even something like the Grimoire of Arthur Gauntlet? Has that ever interested you? Have you ever done anything like that?
The closest that I got was I did do work for, I want to say, 8 weeks with using this Gordon's fault, doing the headless rite and working with the Four Kings.
Okay. That's
the closest that I did, and we didn't get along.
No way.
It was interesting. I mean, there's on my Bandcamp, my parting offerings to them was I made musical tracks for the Four Kings. Yeah. But it really was unpleasant. The whole thing was incredibly unpleasant. And that also just kind of goes to show how stubborn I am, because I did do it for the whole time period I said I was, even though it was terribly unpleasant after the first week.
Right.
It's like, okay, we're doing it. We'll see. Yeah, it's we did not get along.
Really?
And it was interesting. My allies basically kind of stepped back for that whole thing. They're like, you go do what you want to do. You go check that out. You'll be back. And it was crazy. It led to some good things as well, but it was distinctly unpleasant is what I would say. It's not that it wasn't effective. Yeah. But I found it distinctly unpleasant.
See, that's for strangely, it might just be my upbringing or just the fact that I've been obsessed with books. But the magic, and of course I don't do what Stephen Skinner says, you have to do every single thing as the book says. I've been adapting, and it's the chaos magic thing that I have. It's just, I don't need a knife that has killed a man. I've got a very old knife, and I know exactly where it comes, so it's imbued with some kind of story. But I have terrifying things and I have unpleasant things, but I also feel that the gains that I've made by working through certain grimoires has been ridiculously effective. And I don't know if that's because I did it before I had any kind of allies up front to begin with, so maybe that might be a thing where there was some headbutting going on for you. I couldn't diagnose it from this far away, but I've just found that specifically with about 7 particular grimoires that were written hundreds of years ago, I have some incredible experiences from them. But I'd recommend them for most people. But I would be interested to see if you ever dipped your toe back in, Aidan. I think that would be an interesting
my sense of it is that even though I spent a lot of time in cities, they feel like city spirits.
Okay.
And they feel like city spirits. They have an energy that's related to me. This is something that I really spent a lot of time with. It feels to me incredibly urban and incredibly human-centered. And that is really not my jam.
I hear you.
So it's an interesting one. I kind of did that just to see. I have actually, I rarely sell worked pieces, but I do have a piece that was a collaboration from me and Daniel Carmichael. Okay. That was done for that work that has been deconsecrated for several years, and I will actually probably put that up for auction at some point if somebody wants it, because it's a special little piece, and I don't feel comfortable destroying it, so it would like to be used, just not by me.
For sure. So we have to get to the nitty-gritty here, because I know the listeners want to know. Aidan, what, in your opinion, would be the best way for people to start to work with, I hate the word work, but it's just so ingrained in me, stupidly enough, but to experience spirits? What for you would be the things that you'd need to do if you wanted to get involved in some kind of spirit interaction?
I'm not going to give anybody a very user-friendly answer to that one, I'm afraid. For me, that came through extensive trance work, which took me a very, very long time to gain any skills with. And it took me a longer time to realize that I only get about 4 to 5 good months of that a year, which is in the dead of winter. Okay. It's just not available to me. And so I just don't bother because it's really not available. Yeah. I think trying to figure out how to separate from kind of the pace of the modern world is the most important skill for most people so that you can really chill out. I think that to really have these kind of things, and I'll throw this out there, I am absolutely not the guy that does excitatory methods. I'm not a drummer. I don't dance. I don't like any of that stuff. Right. I like to be alone, somewhere very quiet, and I can do killer work. Yeah, groups of people, no. I don't do it anymore. I don't even try. No. I've done it. It's not my thing. Getting really open to the experiential learning side. So I would really strongly recommend, as people are kind of diving into that stuff, that they do not look outside of their own actual experiences for validation of anything that occurs.
Good call.
So don't go looking to see what a rabbit means. Don't go looking to see if that spirit is in a book somewhere. Don't do any of that shit. Yes.
Yeah.
And don't worry about it either. For my experience of dealing with the spirits is in the way that I do, which is, again, primarily trance-based and then offering-based during the rest of the year. And I get information from them, but it's not like the immersive thing that I get to do in the wintertime. Offering practices to your allies. I outline how I do this in 6 ways, and it's actually more specific than people appear to be getting. That the language that I use is kind of crucial in there. But yeah, kind of regular offering practices, do everything that you can to slow down your mind from the pace of the modern world. Get off your computer as much as possible, get off your phone as much as possible.
Bingo.
Try and quiet down your living situation as much as possible. If there are people that you know just piss you off, that aren't good for you, that you put up with because they're family, get them out of your life.
Yeah.
None of that stuff helps. And yeah, kind of dedication to long-term practice and accept what comes. Yeah. I would say 80% of my experiences or more, no, I would go way higher than that. 95% of my experiences with the spirits, what is happening is unclear at the time.
Yeah.
But the end result is beneficial. And that's the way that I work, is it's like, okay, you're showing me shit. I don't know why. You're not answering questions about why. Yeah. I'm supposed to see it. You're teaching me something. I don't know why. And just let it go, let it come, because part of the thing that we're doing, I think, or trying to do, is something that is really out of tune with modern civilization.
Boy, howdy.
And so that's a really critical piece to me, is realize that that's true. This one's really hard to throw out there, which is that unless you are already kind of locked into a religious model, I would strongly suggest you try not interpreting what happens in that framework. Even if you are, don't assume that that spirit that shows up to you, that you see as being clearly some deity, is that deity. They're using what's inside of you to produce a language. And the process is about learning that language for you. There is none of the shit that I've had. The stuff that's gone on in the last 10 years, the only places that I can find anything that is kind of usefully informative is in studies of what we like to call primitive cultures.
Right.
Yeah, all of the modern magic stuff for me is non-helpful in interpretation of spirit contact. Mm-hmm. It's often very useful for getting in there. Yeah, take your time and dedicate yourself to becoming as kind of internally and externally quiet as you can. Right. Because the shit is subtle initially. And it's often subtle for a long, long time. Right. And it's often subtle unless they really need your attention, in which case shit is bad. Yeah. They don't need your attention to make your day better.
No.
They need your attention to save your ass. And so it's generally going to be way more subtle for most people than what they expect. There are people that are absolute, like what I refer to as like easy hallucinators. Yeah. That are going to get just fuck tons of information out the gate. They go, hey, I would like to meet my allies, and they're there.
They're there. Yeah.
That is not most people that aren't already having that experience. No. And a lot of the stuff that's written is unfortunately written by people that are very easy responders. I was not an easy responder. I did a lot of work, and I just kind of trusted that the things that I was drawn to do were doing something for years and years and years. And then it began opening up. And it really opened up more in the last 7 years than it did in the previous, whatever that is, 25 or so years of practice.
Yeah. The book that has everybody's route to spirit contact does not exist. I just want people to realize that, unfortunately.
This is so not a universal thing.
No. That's the hard thing about it. You might get close. There might be some glimpses of certain things. But I agree with Aidan entirely here. I think a thing from my angle, and I say it constantly throughout the podcast, is the centrality of ancestors, I think, is one of those things that is maybe one of the best in-routes. How you deal with the ancestors, there's tons of books for them, but you still always have to find your way. That's just how it goes. But I think perhaps setting up some kind of ancestral altar in your house, just talking to them is a great way, and slowing things down the way that Aidan says. Slow things down a little bit and just talk to them, because these are people that hopefully some of them have been very familiar to you, and just start to push on that a little bit. I know a lot of people have fear. The idea of fear is a big one when you're talking about spirits. All throughout the episode, Aidan's been talking about certain things that might to some people seem extremely scary, but he's also said something incredibly important, and thank goodness he did, is that spirits, in a way, they need us, strangely. In the way that light doesn't exist unless there's something to observe it, spirits are like this. Do malevolent spirits exist? Yeah, they do, just like everything. But there's ways of getting rid of the fear, and one of them is that they may not like the fact that you have to get their attention, but they need it. It's somewhat reciprocal in some way. But your book for how do you get to experience spirits, there's no place that this exists, this mythical book that you want. But there's certain ways of doing things. What do you?
Yeah, and I was going to say, and I'm really down with that, and I think it's an important thing. It's like asking someone, how do I get to New York City, without knowing where you are, without knowing whether you can drive, whether you have any money, what the time of the year is. Mm-hmm. There's a vast array of answers, and some of them will really suck if you attach to them as being the way, if they're not the right way for you. And it's unfortunate because it makes it more difficult, but it's fortunate because it is that personal, I think. Yeah. Once you get in there, you go, oh, okay, that's what I had happen, was when it finally really clicked open all the way. I went from having kind of sporadic things going on to stuff going on that I believe functionally saved, if not my life, then my sanity came from my allies. So to me, if you feel the call to it, it's worth doing it. I will throw out another thing, and this is, I'm going to pitch another podcast on your show, which is, I really would love people to go and listen to the Glitch Bottle episode with Meredith Graves on it. It
was fantastic.
Meredith is a friend and is brilliant. Yeah. But she says something that is really important to this question and the last one, which she says in there, and she says it way better than I am, but this will maybe get you to go there. She says, if you're new coming into this stuff, look at what you think it's like as your first stepping stone, because that is filled with information. Yeah. And so I can look at this in my path and go, yeah, the first thing that I found that made sense was Carlos Castaneda's crazy made-up shit.
Right.
But it's still kind of a story or a universe that makes, in a way, the most sense to me, right? And so I spent a lot of time kind of fighting against this thing because I knew it was crap from an anthropological standpoint after a certain point. So it's like, well, discard that. But then I ended up hammering my way through ceremonial magic for many years, and then kind of ended up like, oh, I'm kind of back where I started. Right. And I think that that's kind of what Meredith is perhaps getting at. But that one is worth a listen for some very good thinking about all of this.
Absolutely. I think everything that you've tabled for people beginning this journey, and it's wonderful. My magic cannot be separated from spirits. I can't at this point in any way, shape, or form not have the two. For people, the biggest thing, I think, pay attention more than anything. Pay attention to what's around you. If you have animals in your house, you know when they're seeing shit. You know when there's something that's around. Just pay attention to that. And don't explain everything. Just get off of that needing to explain everything right away. I mean, besides the obvious ones, right? But if something falls down in your room, don't immediately get up. Just pay attention, listen for a little bit, because it will happen. And as soon as you start knocking, things will happen and you will start to experience. But don't give it an explanation. Just experience. These things, they could be, as Jeffrey Kripal, one of my heroes, says, they could be objective and subjective at the same time. But I love the fact that Aidan uses the word language, because they pull us into their stories as we're telling them ours. And that's something that Aidan is really, really locks down in his newest book, Weaving Fate. It's just wonderful. What's the benefit of a spirit model for magic to you, Aidan?
I go back to what I said earlier about kind of Occam's razor. You can come up with a million potential models that don't involve the spirit, but you have to work at it. If we do look at what all of our ancestors believed, whether that is the saints, whether that is the hungry ghosts, whether that is raw conjuring spirits, whether that is finding the spirits that have given spirit sickness to people in older phases of civilization, they all are in agreement that in some way, this is the best explanation of what's going on. Right. Which again, and it's something that I hammer on a lot that some people have a real problem with, it doesn't mean that it's accurate. It means that it works.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's, to me, way more important than having proof of what specifically is going on. It's like, and this is what I got from chaos magic, right, is, do you have a story that allows for these events you're trying to influence through magic, or these things you're trying to experience, that allows it to occur in a way that is comfortable for you? Yeah. And to me, that's the biggest thing. Is it's like, if that calls to you at all, you've got a couple million years of people that would agree with you as that being a good model.
Very much so. I love the versatility of a spirit model, because unlike things like, say, I know I rag on about it all the time, but Neoplatonism, which is a useless tool in my estimation, but the possibilities of a spirit model are absolutely endless. And recently I've just been on a bit of a tear with the work of Dr. Jack Hunter. He comes at things from a somewhat biological way as well. He released a slideshow earlier where he talks about using organismic models for certain things. Now, one of my favorite books that I read this year it's called Entangled Life. It's by Merlin Sheldrake, and it's about fungus and how fungus is everything in the world. And he talks about, Jack Hunter basically talks about something called mycorrhizal fungus, basically. And he says that this is fungus that literally attaches to the root structures of plants. And what it does is that it's a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. The process itself is called mycelium. Mycelium is not a thing. It's not a certain thing. It is indeed a process. And he talks about how you don't have plants without mycelium, and you don't have this fungus without mycelium as well. Fungus cannot photosynthesize, so it attaches to root structures of plants, where it will provide for the plant water retention and nutrients from the soil, and in turn, the fungus gets sugars to allow it to grow. In a way, mycelium is a liminal process, and for me, somebody who's interested in spirits, this kind of gives me a little tingle in the back, because I'd like, I like this idea of spirits somehow being liminal. We've separated mind and matter so well since the Cartesian boondoggle that never shall the two meet. Mind's in one place, matter's in another place. And for me, who's interested in the work of Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, and I know I'm just throwing names out like crazy here, is that he's got this idea of something called dual aspect monism. And he didn't come up with it, but the idea that mind and matter are actually one thing, and that at some point in how we operate, there's a split, and that human beings were the splitters. Jack's presentation really enlightened me in some way, because what if it's not just us that are the splitters? What if somehow the spirit world, this thing that connects like a mycelium process, is the spirit world itself? But that's just one of the crazy, crazy ways that you can apply a spirit model to biology, to the study of fungus. You can apply any kind of, from idealism to panpsychism to animism, it all works. Spirit models work for nearly everything in a very useful, and I would dare say, and you didn't use the word Aidan, but I'd say a somewhat pragmatic way. It's about utility.
And I think that we're wired to it. I think that that's dead on. I think that if we look at our history, instead of buying the kind of whack shit that came out, yeah, but we were just primitive savages then.
Right.
Go, no, this is just what we've always done. Because it worked. These things didn't exist all across the planet for as long as we can tell as concepts, not specific named versions of it, but this is true of sorcery in itself, it works.
Yeah.
It's always worked. And I doubt that it's one of those things that you can really get to the bottom of to say, okay, here's the mechanism why this works. Because I think it's like it's happening at a substrata well other than the things that we're able to take apart and put back together and see how they work.
The thing that people don't realize is that adopting a magical viewpoint, or even an animist viewpoint, or even an animist spirit model, is that, if it was taken up in great measures by a vast number of people, we don't lose the technology, we don't lose the medicine, we don't return atavistic way to a worse way of life. In fact, I think that its benefits are beyond beneficial. Benefits beyond beneficial, I know that, but I hope people can understand. Aidan is entirely correct. It's just somewhat recently that we've decided that it is no longer functional. Well, I don't want to sound like a bit of a downer, and I do think that the world is getting better, but we're not doing a very good job of working our way through the world. Animist cultures are doing a little bit better of taking care of the planet. They're doing a little bit better with things like mental illness, tons of things that say that this is probably something that can be adopted, and we lose absolutely nothing. So what now, Aidan? Like, what happens now? Well, do you think that spirits will ever be explained, or do they need to be?
I certainly don't think that they need to be.
No.
I don't know. Modern humans, in the sense that most of us think of modern humans, not necessarily in the anthropological sense, but are this teeny tiny blip.
Yeah.
We have existed for a teeny tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of just existence on this planet, let alone beyond that. And so I have no idea. Theoretically, sure, we got to change priorities a little bit before we get there. Yeah. Perhaps the search for that one in a really intelligent way would actually be beneficial to changing those priorities. I don't think it matters what they are. I think that they are available to interact with and to have relations with. And one of my root arguments is you already are. You may just not know it. Because I do believe that it's absolute there. The spirit world is absolutely imminent. We're just incredibly blinded. Yeah. And that's really the process, is how do you take off those blinders so you can see what's going on enough that you can interact. And that doesn't mean you're trying to get to the bottom of it, because no one ever has. You can spend your time that way if that's your calling. But for your average person who's trying to have a better life, it's completely unnecessary.
Aidan, are we just insane or deluded or what's going on? Like, are we fooling ourselves somehow, do you think?
I don't think so.
No.
I believe that I have been deluded in the past about particular things, but usually that was just from a overwhelming desire to nail things down.
Yeah.
That I wanted the answer instead of I wanted a workable approach to life.
Right.
But no, it's one of the things that I find the most interesting about kind of the animist spirit model kind of approach is I've yet to find anything that ever said that this isn't just what we do. Yeah. Up until very recently. And I think we can see us doing it still, just in an incredibly disguised fashion. We do it about different things. I think it is part of how we are made to perceive.
The original intuition, would you say?
It's something like that. Yeah, I think it's like I talked about, sorcery or this stuff as being the roots of human culture. And I think that's really what I'm speaking to is that's where we kind of like went, oh, I mean, people say, maybe food sources changed or something. I think what changed is we became really conscious of the stuff that we were interacting with. And so we were able to learn things that are very peculiar in many ways, but are very beneficial if we take it that route.
Yeah, I think there's something else here. And the sooner you register that, I think the easier things are for us. There's something else here. We don't know what it is. Maybe we never will. I'm okay with that. But sticking with the curiosity. Aidan and I were talking before the microphone came on about absolute certainty about everything. And we've done a pretty good job, Aidan, you and I, of not being so utterly certain of what we're talking about, by sticking to the curiosity and to sticking to a very useful model for explaining experiences that we have all the time, nearly on a daily basis for myself. That is why one of the major reasons why spirits are central to magic, to sorcery, and I would wager to life itself. Yeah, Aidan, that's the spirit episode.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been utterly amazing. We have to talk about your new book, Weaving Fate. You were kind enough to you sent me a PDF of your newest book, and I was flabbergasted with this book. What can you tell us about this book? Because I loved it, and you would probably say much better what it's about.
I'm going to put this one on a couple of people and my allies. After 6 Ways, I began writing what I know are going to be several books. And this one really came about from revisiting, because somebody asked me a question about it and I couldn't remember what I said. An interview that I did with Chawan Ku, who has a podcast called Witches and Wine. She was basically asking at one point, like, this was about 6 Ways, like, how would I suggest that people that are new to this stuff kind of actually get into functional magic? If we view it from kind of the wider occultist model, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Even in 6 Ways, there's a lot there. It's a book that is designed to be beginner friendly, but it's years of work if somebody wanted to do it.
Absolutely.
With Weaving Fate, it was really like, okay, what's the simplest tool set that I can give that I know from experience produces really extreme, and they can be both subtle or very radical results for everyone that I know that has done it. So there's not as much spirit model stuff in there. It is a really straightforward, again, tool set based on kind of narrative, as we've been talking about.
Yeah.
How do you modify your internal narrative, both on a psychological level, but then bringing magical approaches to that process to change it from mere fantasizing or getting catharsis through journaling or something into something that becomes like a talismanic power in its own. And that's what the Black Book, the hypersigil portion of it is. And this is an approach I've used for a very long time. And my life is a reflection of the work that I've done in the Black Books. Right. And the nice thing again about it is that piece of it is very simple.
Very much
it is not hard to do. Most everyone can do it. You don't have to know a lot of other magic to do it.
No, not at all.
There are a couple of other components in it that are a little trickier because a lot of people have trouble kind of aggressively daydreaming. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the other aspect of it, is how do you reinforce the things that you're writing or the things that you want to change about things that have happened to you in the past, that you would like to have a different kind of memory experience of those things so that they're not weighing on you in the same way. Mm-hmm. Perhaps shifting them from things that were traumatic and function as kind of debilitating influences. How do we turn those instead into kind of more points of power? And then, as I talk about in the book, using these two processes to generate kind of an incredibly potent magical feedback loop for changing your experience of the world. And then the last section of it, the Fever Stonework, is really directly going after kind of the calcified trauma, so that you're not being as heavily influenced by that stuff. And so it's a unified piece of work that is really a long-term project.
Right.
But again, you don't need to know anything much. It doesn't really require you to take on or leave a belief system or a approach to doing other magic. There's no reason why you couldn't integrate your current practices into it very easily.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to me, it's just the most useful tool set I could throw out there. Though it was the book that was the closest to done, it was the one that, as the kind of coronavirus thing was kicking up, we decided it was the most useful tool to kick out into the world. So shortly, really, as that was kicking up, I dropped back into the project on that one and said, okay, we're finishing this one. Let's get it out there so people can use it. Yeah. As it was pretty clear people's lives were going to get pretty fucked up by what was going on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's not that you don't need to know or read Six Ways before Weaving Fate for me, but I think that it helps. It helps if you have it, but Weaving Fate is somewhat more imminent, and it seems like a product of what people can use right fucking now. That is a great, great thing. And
probably by the time this comes out, it'll be either very close or we'll be out there.
Wonderful. And I said it in my review that after I read the book, I sent Aidan a note. But Aidan, I hope you never stop writing. Whether that be a benediction or whether that be a curse, it's up to you. Reading your kind of magic, if I don't do exactly what you do in the books, but the way that you write makes me want to do better at what I do, which is why it's not just for beginners. I think that your work is important for people that have been 10, 20 years into magic. It's like, there's things here that makes me want to do better. You've written 2 fantastic books, so I really hope you don't stop writing. And you did hint that there's a couple of books. There's a couple of books in the background.
There's a couple in the background. I'm going to my immediate projects. Well, as we talked about earlier, my first episode of the podcast is just coming live right now, so it should be live before this goes out.
What is the name of your podcast?
Oh, Aidan Wachter 6 Ways. I decided to just make it as easy to find as possible for anybody who is searching. Right. It's really, the intention of it is to be a bit more Q&A. I've got a big Facebook group I was recording videos in, but I did not want to put them on YouTube because YouTube is such a shit show.
Tell me more.
And you never noticed. Amazing. And after doing the recordings for the Building the Bones course that I ran, I was like, I can just do a podcast, kind of move those questions, those kind of thoughts onto kind of shorter form, like 25, 30-minute podcast. Wonderful. So that'll be out now by the time this is out. And then, there's at least 2 books that are partially they're manifesting, so we'll see.
Wonderful. Aidan, where can people get a hold of you through the interwebs, if you will?
If you do a search for Aidan Wachter 6 Ways, you will find me all over the place. aidanwachter.com is my website that hosts the blog and the podcast are there. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, just Aidan Wachter 6 Ways, and all that stuff should pop up.
And you can see very lovely pictures of Aidan's dogs. I guess they're their own dogs. Your allies of the furry sort.
I provide them a little bit of containment so they don't rampage the neighborhood.
There you go. But please check out aidanwachter.com and Aidan Wachter's new podcast. I'll have links to it. And I'll put up something on my on the show notes for this episode, everybody. But I'm really looking forward to what more you do, Aidan. As far as contemporary magicians or sorcerers, I don't listen to a lot of them. I'm too wrapped up in my own bullshit, and you're one of the ones that has really given me a giant kick in the ass, and I thank you for that, because sometimes you need something like that. May you never stop writing, sir. Never.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed the kick in the ass. Yeah. It could go the other way.
Perfect, Aidan. Thank you so much. People that are interested, please head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you can subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere that podcasts are available. I'm there. I also have a Twitter account on there. You can find my Facebook account, which I don't use too often, and Instagram. I'm still learning with Instagram. Aidan's better at me at Instagram. I just want people to know his Instagram account is actually really, really good. I've got, I don't know, I'm not good with Instagram. I don't know what it is.
You just need more dogs.
More dogs.
More dogs and chickens.
There you go. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, you'll find show notes for every episode. Guys, the show notes for this one are going to be pretty interesting. Please check them out there. If you like the podcast, leave a review. I know everybody likes the star clicky thing that's on iTunes, but if you write a couple of words about me, remember, magic is a language. So show a little of your magic off, and please leave a review for my podcast there. If you enjoy the show, tell a friend. If they're weird like you, and you think that they might find this stuff interesting, maybe give it a shot. Aidan and I think we're pretty right that we've been doing this for a long time, and I think a lot of us know this. We just kind of put it off into the background. But tell a friend about the show. That would be wonderful. Pretty soon I'm going to be starting a Patreon. It'll be up before the end of the month. I'm really looking forward to that. There's going to be some interesting content on there, but look to that to come out sometime towards the end of August. And I just want people to know, the old way of doing this show, the whole Doug lectures at somebody for an hour and a half, that's not going anywhere. But I think that bringing some people on board onto the podcast with the scope and the expertise and the curiosity like Aidan will be beneficial for everybody, because as most people that tune into the podcast, they're kind of on the cusp of magic, and it's good to hear some other people's opinions and what they really think this magic thing might be. What magic is this indeed? So that's the end of the show. Aidan, thank you so much for being on this show. I had an absolute wonderful... We've been recording for nearly 2.5 hours. My God, it's gone by like... Are you sitting in your laundry room, sir?
I am not. That is...
Oh.
This is what used to be the shop before I retired myself from jewelry for a number of reasons. Right. And so now this is the ritual chamber home of the chest freezer.
Okay.
Because we didn't have anywhere else to put it, because we live in a very small house. Yeah. So, yes. So I do magic next to the cow.
Perfect. Wonderful.
So it's necromancy.
Hey, I'm all about it. I'm all about it. Aidan, well, this can't be the last. I'll have to have you on the show again at some point. I look forward to everything that's going to happen with the release of Weaving Fate and all books that come out afterwards. But I'd love to have you back. Your purview and scope on magic is something that's very much my jam. And let's not say goodbye. Let's say see you later, please.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Everybody, that's the show on spirits. I hope you enjoyed it. I loved it. Again, this has been absolutely wonderful. And thanks to Aidan. And come on back to What Magic Is This? We'll talk about more of this crazy, weird stuff that you all love and enjoy. And keep your spirits up. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. We'll talk at you soon. Bye-bye.